when we're trying to have a scalable engine or trying to handpick talent, there is a change and a different type of approach that's needed with applicants versus headhunts. When we are going to someone from the big FANG type companies or a very great AI well-funded company or anywhere really that may not be actively looking, they don't start off completely in love with this. So we have to sell to them the mission and take them on that journey. We have to put all this to them in an amazing proposition that shows them that this can have huge value and become a rocket ship.
Beth, thanks for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me.
For anyone who's listening who maybe doesn't know about your background or what you do you mind just giving a quick introduction to who is Beth Nevins?
Yeah, so I'm Beth. I'm based in London in the UK. And my background is in tech startups for many, many years, reporting into founder CEOs. I have my own portfolio company as a consultancy now called developer.io. And we help startup founders typically from seed to Series C as our sweet spot. And it's across three key areas. One is retained search for candidates. Two is people projects in the design space, for example, compensation, a reward, or performance. And the third one is coaching. And we have a specific, I call it centoring. It's a mix of coaching questions and mentoring for first-time founders on the journey from Series A to Series B. And we also do more general leadership training as well. And that's me.
Maybe a hard-hitting question right off the bat here, but I talk to a lot of different companies, larger companies, that are starting to bring up this question of, is AI going to replace my workforce? And I've heard it from both sides. From public sector, they kind of want to be protective of their employees. And then from private sector, there's kind of, oh, well, can I replace employees with AI? Where do you kind of fall on this debate, this discussion of AI as being a replacement to humans?
Okay. I mean, let's just see where it is at the moment, right? So people thought there'd be like flying cars by now, and even though autonomous vehicles have made like huge progress, we're still not where we assume we would be, 5, 6 years ago, even with that. So it will definitely change the nature of the role. You've seen it with me now. We'll see a lot of new roles emerge around prompt engineering and so forth across lots more businesses. I actually think what I don't agree with, I think is really strange, is I think we can't hold on or resist change, whether we agree whether change is progress or not. And for example, it's so strange that the educational sector is kind of penalizing people for using AI, when actually in the workplace, it's the fundamental thing that we need to invest in now to have that competitive advantage and stay relevant. So for me, this is a big, interesting thing that's sort of at tension in terms of like the future of work, that we really actually to focus on this being more creative and how do we change the educational system to leverage AI in a way that still has loads of value creation of the human mind in education. So I think that's the more important thing I think we need to be tackling. I think there's a real problem there right now. And in the workplace, to your question of will it replace us, I think all our roles will change. I think that's a good thing. It allows us for more value creation. As I mentioned earlier in our offline chat around, we are still the Lego master. We are still needing nuance on how things need to be built and put together, and we're still problem solvers. But ChatGPT right now, at the state it's at least for the next, however long we believe we can look out, it is an amazing part of those Lego blocks that are easily automated or built that we can put together. So I'm pro change anyway, as I would work in startups, so nothing scares me. But yeah, the world will never be the same in work, and I think this is a perfect, whether we see it as a storm or perfect timing coming out of chaos. So this was inevitable that this was going to, take off, hugely, and it'd be interesting to see where it goes. But if we believe humans are intrinsically good, then it will still be used in a good way at work and in the world more generally.
With your work, have you seen a shift in what series, well, you said seed to Series C companies, I believe. Have you seen a shift in what they're looking for from talent? Are you kind of starting to see these job requirements bleed in of, experience with ChatGPT or prompt engineering kind of rise as a new job category, or other areas that maybe I'm not even thinking of as new roles that are being defined and sought after, or is it still early stages?
So this is really interesting observation. That's an amazing question. So I work with actually a lot of tech AI companies where the product they're building is, leveraging AI, LLMs, Gen AI stuff. And I've even worked at a company which is, well, I can't name the name because I'm under a lock and key, but is very much a purist tech company in this space in London. And the strange thing, even in those absolute hardcore AI companies where that is the thing they're building, there's still, and again, it comes down to culture and really leading with this. And this is a wider problem in businesses when we look at cultures. How does the culture then match and reinforce the very products you're building that help enable that? So when I went into this deep tech AI company, I noticed, and the CEO was extremely visionary. He had all these ideas, but it still wasn't being done. And there were quite a lot of people. He was saying, like, when someone starts, they should be generating images or using our product to build stuff within their first week and show it back to the business and Slack and all these types of things. I was like, absolutely. Like, if that is the thing that we're building, we have to make sure that that is the everyday lived culture of how we're operating internally as teams to project and be better in the world. And there's a good fintech AI agent company that I worked with at the start of last year, and the founders got a data science background. And I'm not in the weeds with them now, but I have heard through the grapevine that the founders very much around pushing AI and everyone learning about AI in the business, which I really like because that's very much part of their product. So I think that is critical. If you have an AI company, that needs to be very well thought in your culture of how everybody is leveraging that in their roles and understanding that deeply and all the use cases that can be applied per department. But I think we're still at that first stage with most businesses. I went to an amazing talk by, I hope I can name drop, he's the CEO of a company, I think they're called Mindstone in the UK. Brilliant company, massive gap there to go and train companies in AI. And what he was saying was the first challenge we've even got at the maturity model level of companies right now en masse is we don't even know our use cases as an individual. So we have to dig into that and find that out first before we can really, trust AI and see the real benefits. And I think that's the big challenge, that if you are a lawyer or, any job, it takes a lot for you to actually even have your own workshop to think, oh, actually, this could be that and this could be that. And that's why the challenge is in ourselves with these products, because as I say, with most customer research and speaking to customers, the customer doesn't really know what they need. It's for the product manager or the company who's building the product to tell them what they need. But the thing with generative AI and all that, there's no real training manual that kind of comes with it if you unlock it first. So you kind of got this thing and you're like, now what? You can play around with it. And I think it comes down to a degree of problem solving and an innate curiosity that maybe leads to that and a real desire to use it. But to some people, that can be very less intuitive if they don't really know how to apply it in their day-to-day work.
I think some of those traits that you touched on, the degree of curiosity, there is no training manual, so to speak, are often, at least in my experience hiring for startups, some of the traits that you look for in talent in an earlier stage company. So where would you say the line is drawn for your experience with kind of building teams, building talent, finding talent, and kind of bringing those into startups? Where are those traits things that you need to double down on more versus, say, a Series C and even later enterprise corporations where you're looking for a different skill set? Is that shifting and changing with AI and we need kind of more of that creativity and curiosity in enterprise? Or is it still the earlier, more nimble, smaller companies are going to have the more, curious minded folks that are exploring, experimenting, and trying things out?
Very interesting. Oh, these are great questions today. Um, So,
Keep you on your toes.
yeah, great. So let's break that down. So I think, at a basic level, before we introduce the AI concept, yes, there are different types of personas historically we've needed. So for example, in certain roles, you will want someone who's a bit more evangelistic in nature. Let's say it's sales or even a recruiter, and their strength has to be selling, as in without anything really, and low process, high collaborative sort of people, because that's really where you're sort of starting off with 0 to 1. And I
And
think,
let me just double click on that. Low process, highly collaborative. Is that what you said? What
yeah.
does that exactly mean?
So, because when you go into a startup, let's say with 10 people, there is no process. So, and you're working on a load of problems that are first time, whether it's operationally or what a customer flow or whatever, right? Particularly if, all of you haven't done many startups before. So you're learning through iterating rather than this whole like right first time, beautiful, got every framework under the sun built out. So I always say you need a very highly collaborative, daily stand up, daily huddle. Did this work? No, that didn't work. The candidate said this. Can you say that? Can you remember this? Blah, 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 blah. And you're just constantly sort of playing this sort of tennis match back and forth to iterate and feedback to each other very, very quickly to get things done, basically, and get stuff out the door. But as you scale, that becomes arguably in culture it's very hard to do. So what you end up having to do then is a bit more process. So again, people become less intuitive or collaborative, and they, as you scale, whether it's a junior then or anyone who starts when you've got onboarding at scale, they can read and see things and go, okay, this is how things work. This is how I get things done in a systemized engine way. Particularly when you start seeing playbooks or repetition and patterns that work in the business at that point, from that low process, high collaboration, you start seeing the patterns or the need then that actually we need to codify this thing that we've just discovered, or we need to codify why this worked and why this didn't. So the next person who starts can see that and get up to speed quickly and blah, blah, blah. So as you start growing, it's kind of like the oral tradition doesn't scale as much. And at some point, as you see in any text out there, for it to scale across the whole world, it has to be written down somewhere. So, you have to start doing that in a business. So, yes, and then introducing AI, does that change that? That's very interesting, because I suppose it's the it's the other way. It's kind of like, what's the argument here? You could say, is it going to make us dumber because we've got all this automation and and so forth? But I go back to that point of still, in this transition phase until it's like pure automation, maybe we don't have to even think for ourselves. There's still that master of architecture needed to build like a content framework or format, and then build the blocks on GBT or whatever you're building that can be useful for different API calls on Anthropic or OpenAI or whatever models you're doing. Yeah, so I'm not sure is the answer. I need to think about that more time, and maybe I'll write about that. I think. What do you think?
I think there's always this opinion that technology makes us dumber and it's going to
Yeah.
replace people and it's going to be a negative force. And yet, I think what we just lack as a society, not as individuals, but as a society, is the comfort with not being able to see across the event horizon.
Mm,
And so we don't know what this technology looks like once it's common and everyday use.
yeah.
But what we see is this is going to be a big change, and I'm scared because I don't know what's on the other side. But if
Yeah.
you look backwards, time and time and time and time again, Wikipedia didn't destroy people's ability to have knowledge, right? It
Yes.
didn't. The internet didn't destroy our ability to connect. And there are problems with technology. There are problems that arise, just like there are problems with any new thing. But I think you said it. I forget if it was before recording or after, but you can't resist change. Change is inevitable,
Yes.
and so it's a question of learning to grow with it and then leveraging it for the good and trying to
Yeah.
cause a positive outcome.
Yeah. And I think, without getting too philosophical, because I read lots of philosophers about this, but I'm not going to argue that change necessarily is progress, because again, there's trade-offs and problems that can come with that. To your point around, the internet hasn't impacted our ability to connect. Some people may strongly disagree with that, right? Or the problems that
Yeah.
social media and disconnect and perhaps lack of empathy may be evident there's a consequence or so forth. There are very strong arguments that people have strong opinions on to bring people to an office for this very reason, right? So, I have my own views on all of that. And yes, I agree. What else is in our society? Yeah, change is inevitable. I would never resist it, but there's great things on the internet going around when the first phone came out, and people were talking about the text message, and people are saying like, oh, is these phones are going to give us all these problems and all these things, and look what happened now. It's just like completely like day to day. Your phone is probably the thing that you probably get buried with at the end of in the future, but so yeah, I agree. Like, history or is already, if you look back, informs the future. And in a strange way, we don't look at that enough and think about it, because when people start telling me they can't do something or they're worried about change and so forth, it's quite funny because when I coach them, I say, so can you tell me about the last, 3 things where change happened in your life? And then we say, oh, and you're still here? They go, oh, yeah. I said, nothing bad happened? Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. So when you say that to someone as an individual and you coach them, it helps them with that resilience, and it helps them realize that terrible thing that's happened to them, right, will pass. Grief always passes and never fully goes away, but it changes. So all these things that happen to our lives historically can also help inform, our experiences through navigating through the future. And yeah, change is inevitable. That is just a fact of life. Yeah.
Ties in a lot to what you do as well. So you work with startups and you help them grow, you help them build talent, build teams, coaching, etc. Why startups in particular? Startups are notoriously difficult clients. They have
Yeah.
smaller budgets. They're figuring stuff out. What drew you to startups originally in your career, and then also now with starting Developer?
So I entered I fell into recruitment, and I fell into the startup world, like most people do. Not so much startups, but fell into recruitment. And I didn't know what I wanted to do after university. So I took the job, and I'll be honest, I took the job because it was in fancy, wanky Berkeley Square in London. It's a very posh place. And I thought, wow, this is like, a whole different world to the Brecon Beacons where I'm from, which is in the middle of nowhere, me and the sheep and the cows. So I took this job on really superficial reasons. And, I absolutely did not have a clue what C++ even meant. It's a language, by the way. And I learned all about this, and it was amazing, and I just loved it. And the interesting thing about that agency was it specialized in startup recruitment. So I was working with founders really early on. I didn't know much different at that point. I thought that was just the way things were. And we worked with, I won't name names because some of them have done well, some of them spectacularly didn't in the news. But, we worked with some amazing, really early booming, very, very high tech companies at the time, like huge accounts. We were like, literally, we won everything as a team. And I loved it. It was an amazing, amazing experience. And then I actually strangely left that company to a much bigger company. And I really didn't like it. And what I found was really, really strange was there was kind of like all these different functions that then didn't talk to each other enough. So the whole time I was there, I never really had like any sort of review or any sort of real valuable feedback. It was all, it wasn't even a corporate compared to some of these 10K, headcount companies, but it just wasn't, it was not right for me. And I remember sitting at my desk, and I remember talking to the person next to me, and I was like, I'm going to work in deep tech. I am absolutely going to get a job in deep tech. And I didn't even look. It just came and found me literally 2 weeks later. So I was.
And what was, so you were unhappy, but what was it specifically about deep tech that was calling your name that you knew you wanted to go towards?
I like hard stuff. So my sister will even say to me, there's something wrong with you, Beth, because you never make life easy for yourself. Like, why don't you go and do this job? Or why don't you go and do that? Like, why are you doing this? I don't know why. I can't explain it. But I think if you speak to people who know me, I am the person that goes into the hellhole or the pain. I run straight into the fire. I don't, it doesn't bother me. Like, I believe anything is fixable, and any problem can be solved. I'm just that sort of person. And I just love founders because they literally have that attitude as well. And there's just, I think some teams really struggle to work with founders. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's days when I want to bash my head against a wall and I say that to them, they start laughing. But I just love it and I just get them. Can't explain it, but I just fully feel like what they say and what, sometimes it's naivety, sometimes it's sheer drive and grit, and no matter what, all of these things I just get. And just another thing, for an example, I spoke to a founder, bless him. His company has finished. I think he sold it. But anyway, he's looking for a job. So he reached out to me randomly. Another founder said, speak to Beth. So I spoke to him last week and I explained to him, I said, look, I think the challenge with this climate right now, there is a bit more pattern recognition going on with C-level roles. He wanted a C-level role in this scale up, blah, blah. And I was managing expectations because I said that the C-suite market is very much now, people aren't going to go outside the box too much in this climate in terms of the types of profile they're going to take. They're probably going to take someone with a more of a track record who's done this sort of ARR sort of journey, particularly if you want like a CCO role, and you haven't done that traction sort of thing before. And I was saying this, quite nicely. And I loved it. He was like, I know me and I will do it. And that's just a founder. But they'll make a hard employee. As Tom Blomfield said the other day on a podcast, Tom Blomfield said, founders make terrible employees. That founder will be difficult to manage, I'll tell you that. But that's a founder talking there, right there, where there's no, they will not take no for an answer. And I love it. It doesn't bother me. It's amazing. And yeah, it's not easy, but I'm so used to it. I wouldn't do anything else. Yeah.
So I would definitely agree with you that founders probably don't make good employees, but obviously founders need a team around them to support them,
Yes.
employees, etc.
Yeah.
What are kind of the characteristics that you start looking for that, again, specifically to technology startups, that are traits, skills, people, aspects of recruiting that are maybe missed or overlooked versus just traditional recruiting, or if you go building your founding team,
Yeah.
or expanding your hiring team, like what are the things that founders might miss or gloss over that actually needs to have a lot more attention paid to?
What might founders miss? So I think the one thing founders are sensitive to, but there's also a flip side of managing this expectation, is I think they're very good at the which is the most fundamental thing. So they get this bit right, which is the care for the mission. I think that's a very unique thing to startups, perhaps over much bigger corporates and so forth. That someone really does need to care about that, because that's what engagement is usually very intrinsically tied to in startups, because they're not easy, right? And whatever people say, they should be lean teams. Sometimes not. There's a lot of overhiring historically that's happened, but they should be lean. And the truth is, and I don't think there's any way you can get around this when you're as ambitious as they are, the hours are long. That's a separate conversation and a separate theme altogether. But if you want to do great things, it's kind of like the tennis sport. I don't think Roger Federer was working 4 days a week on his tennis, right? So I think that it does take a certain personality that kind of gets that. So they get that bit right on the mission and alignment and real passion for that. That's one thing. But there's also then, I think, what founders have to go through is the education of, when we're actually trying to have a scalable engine or trying to handpick talent, there is a change and a different type of approach that's needed with applicants versus headhunts. This is the big thing I've been coaching a lot this year with founders, is when we are going to someone from, the big FANG type companies, or a very great AI well-funded company, or anywhere really that may not be actively looking, they don't start off completely in love with this. So we have to sell to them the mission and take them on that journey, and give them information. So one of the things I'm going through with a client right now is, okay, guys, like we've got this sector we're disrupting, we need more information. Like what reports can we send to the candidates? What else can we get together that draws them in to know much more about the sector that we're actually disrupting, rather than spending 10 minutes with them selling the vision and so forth. They need more. So the more people learn about some of these sectors that particularly could be like quite old school, quite, some real like gnarly problems in there, don't sound that sexy, but actually really is and right for disruption. We have to make that sexy. We have to put all this to them in an amazing proposition that shows them that this can have, huge value and become a rocket ship. So there's all that then that they have to go through that journey. And some of the other things I think maybe they, that can be a double-edged sword, can get seduced by, is full passion and mission, but then capability goes by the wayside. So we kind of miss then, any
the believers that can't do anything.
Yeah, and that's all well and good, but we also have, I have my business hat on and think, well, spend needs an ROI. So there's like a kind of Venn diagram of like mission, capability, and will, the skill, will, and then mission maybe. They kind of need to all like intersect and align to make a and that's not even a high performer, because there's all other bits and bobs that you can add to that. But at least that will make someone capable and add value quickly. So yeah, that's usually a bit of an exercise and a journey to take them on, to make sure that we understand the full dimensions that we're actually assessing talent on. Yeah.
You mentioned high performers. I've always been curious. So I'm curious on your opinion. I'm going to try to phrase this as not a leading question. When hiring a high performer, how do you slot them into your team? And I guess maybe a better question is, when do you want kind of those, in engineering terms, that 10x engineer or that 10x employee, that person who is, a true wizard in their craft, but maybe is less able to relate to the rest of the team? Because well, yeah, I'm going to leave it right there.
Well,
so
that is a leading
question, but yeah,
that is a leading question, my friend, because the truth is, and I got some good stories here. The truth is, a friend of mine in the industry said this to him on a post a while ago on LinkedIn, and it's very poignant and true. She said, there's no such thing as a brilliant jerk, and I agree with that. Because if people can't work with you, then you're not brilliant, really, are you? And I've seen this happen. A couple of stories here. I won't name names or go into too much detail, but we had an engineer that wouldn't join the stand-ups, and that wasn't going to fly with me. And he was good, but I wasn't happy with that. So had to work on that. And that individual also didn't lean in on a very difficult time the company had during a very difficult time in the world. And that person was the only person out of lots and lots of people who didn't lean into the things we needed to do as a company at a critical point. And that was a shame. But that's why it's very important very early on with those signs, when someone's not collaborating, or there's no I in team. I hate to use that phrase, but it's very true. But he was technically good, and that's not great. So we did eventually, things come out in the wash in the end, but it was far too long. And impacted a lot of people who could see what was going on there during that difficult and very tense time as a company. So seeds grow into trees. That's always my phrase. I see something. That's why, I whether we call it radical or, compassionate candor or whatever, we've got to be saying things timely. The whole point of feedback should be real time. And that's where I think values do come into question, and principles by the founders. When problems are raised, they need to be addressed, particularly around those types of behaviors. So that's one thing around role modeling. I do a lot of coaching with in scenarios, and I talk about these stories because they will happen to different founders at different journeys, where their morals and these types of dilemmas will happen. There's not to say there are some circumstances where exceptions need to be made, or we know the timing to fix a problem. That's a different scenario, but we need to recognize that as a problem. It needs to have a plan to be dealt with. So yes, to answer your question, I don't believe there is such a thing as a brilliant jerk, and I am definitely a leader that is known for not putting up with that type of behavior. Even if I get a backlash from it, I have a very hard rule on that.
That's definitive answer on the brilliant jerks. Or not brilliant, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. They're just well, the latter, I'm afraid. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You also get to work with, obviously you're working directly with founders, you're working with teams, you're working with recruiting teams, you're kind of looking at these multiple different aspects, but then you're also looking at multiple different stages of companies. What does that shift look like in hiring your first 10 people is very different than hiring your, 100 to 200th person. So
Yeah.
as founders mature and their companies mature, what do they need to shift their attention to on the talent side of things? Or does it not change, right? Are you still kind of looking for the same traits that you were looking for in the first 10?
There's a few shifts. So let's start with what's the constant, and then let's look at the shift. So the constant is the mission. I've been on other podcasts where people say, oh, well, people care less about it. I do agree. There is at some point, maybe 300, 400, 500 plus, where that's harder to test, right? Because the recruiting has gone so far down the chain in terms of ownership. But I always say nothing's impossible, right? Look at Google, scaled for many, many, many hundreds of people where that culture was, very strong and still very reputable. So yeah, I think the mission is important and be constant for as long as possible. And tied into that, I am a strong believer, although I've had varying success embedding these. But and also I know other companies struggle with this, but I am a big believer in values. But I do believe that the values, it should come from the founder more so than a collective effort, because then they are really role modeled and really felt and really used in terms of the decision making top down. So I do think that's important in terms of how to assess talent. And I think a founder has the responsibility or has the authority as well to veto a candidate, even by their VPs, if they feel strongly on the values and the mission. It doesn't align. It doesn't take autonomy away, but I'm a strong believer that the founder is the sort of cultural custodian, and it shouldn't be dumped onto HR. So I think that they're two constants that need to be there. So whatever your values are, it could be curiosity, could be innovation, could be whatever, right? That's important to the company. And that's a separate conversation of how you think about those. And then I think the shifts, as I said, comes with like, you might have, I call them like the scrappy McScrap types, who are happy to work with like no frameworks and, will figure things out for themselves completely and, don't need that
0 to 1 people.
Yeah, exactly. 0 to 1. They love it. They don't really like the rule. They don't like rules. Bit rebellious types. I'm one of those. Don't like loads of rules.
Me too.
Yeah, yeah, great. We're friends then. So yeah, those types that like the days with the pizza around the table, or whatever, or salads, all around the table, be healthy. Yeah, are independent, are autonomous. And I think are high problem solvers. I think you need that throughout, but I think you particularly need that sort of skill and intellectual horsepower quite early on. And then as you go through later rounds, you're looking for a slightly different persona. I mean, ideally you want all of that plus the next set of, or the persona can widen, whereby I do think you need a bit more of those that are more structural thinkers. And what I mean by that, can start thinking about dependencies, because you don't have one team now, you have multiple teams. I think collaboration, also cross collaboration then, is a separate skill. I think you've got to have the skill of stakeholder management at a certain point in time. If you're even a senior, even a graduate, to be honest, I look for these types of skills of potential across understanding what a stakeholder actually is. I train all my teams in terms of what that meaning actually is. Lots don't know that. So, what's a stakeholder? And then,
Well,
much.
enlighten us. Yeah, what is a stakeholder?
So
Maybe we have
well, a stakeholder,
bad conceptions.
yeah, in a nutshell, a stakeholder is someone that has an invested interest in the outcome of what you're doing. So, if we're doing a particular experience project, who are the stakeholders? So it's going to be finance and how much it costs. It will be maybe all the employees or a particular team if we're doing a particular team focused project. It's going to be the hiring manager maybe that then has to do all those process. Because sometimes I see people go, great, the employees are just going to build this. I was like, well, hang on a minute. There's also the manager stakeholder that then has to like manage that process or manage those things too. So we can't forget the managers. So there'll be stakeholders sometimes missing when we're talking about certain conversations of who are the users, who are the interests, who has been impacted and so forth. And there's actually different ways then I train my team on, and sometimes CEOs, founder CEOs in this transition of different stakeholders need different engagement strategies, different communication strategies. There's lots of very basic diagrams out there which say some need to be informed, some need to be tightly controlled, some need to be influenced, and so forth. So there's different strategies you need as you scale to be able to adapt and turn that on with different people. So I think more adaptability comes important, because you've got more diversity and it's full of sense then at that point and so forth. So there's loads more to that. I could keep going on and on of the changes, and I think as you go even further beyond that, then you need really strong data analytical people that perhaps would not be very good in 0 to 1, and maybe the 0 to 1 don't really want to get deep into the data, but later on you're accumulating enough data to be very, I prefer to say the word data informed than data driven, because sometimes you've still got to use a bit of nuance and gut on top of that with your vision. But you still want to be strongly data led as a company then at that point when you've got enough there to use. So you need those types of people as well that enjoy that and are good with that too as you scale.
Yeah, I appreciate the nuances of it because I think there are so many different things that go into building a company, but team really is a massive portion of it. And so is
Yeah.
product and market fit and marketing
Mm.
and other aspects. But at the end of the day, most of the things that are getting done are being done by humans, maybe AI agents in the future, but right now,
Mm.
humans.
Mm.
And so you can cobble together people and you can do some stuff, but if you have the right team, and right is
Yeah.
subjective and all these things,
Mm.
but
Mm.
if you have a team that is very fine tuned and aligned on that mission, on that vision, on that direction, the output from them, even if the skills aren't necessarily as amazing
Mm.
as a different set of people, but
Mm.
if the cohesion's there, the results can be far more tremendous
Yeah.
than anything else that you could put together.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what more to add. You're completely right. I think, yeah, I read a lot about this, but I know all sorts of my teams. I'm going to be honest, like my teams personally, um, uh, for my sins, we're very close. Like we talk, our one-to-ones is talking about their lives. We don't actually talk about work in our one-to-ones. When they need me for a one-to-one, I'll say, what do you want to talk about? But, we talk about, divorce, kids, drama, everything. We're very a socially tightly knit crew, probably more so than a lot of other managers that I know and perhaps would be comfortable with. But my teams are very close, and it's just the way we end up gravitating and are amazing. And that's why my teams, I like to think, are very highly engaged. I've always scored, at least on a data point of view, the most engaged teams. And I've always say this, which people may agree, but I always believe they've been the most high performing team. So they should, because it's just
It,
that with a people team. Yeah.
I was gonna say, is that something that you think should be modeled, or is that something that's worked for you clearly? But is that something that you would recommend and model? Because I feel like a lot of advice that you hear out there is, a manager you're supposed to kind of have, you're supposed to be friendly but not overly
Mm,
friendly. You want to make sure that the people
yeah.
who report to you kind of aren't seen as a social peer.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but what I'm hearing from you is you are social peers and you have more cohesion and work together. So is that something that you recommend, or is that just it
Well,
works for you
I think
type deal?
I think you do you, right. There's there can be risk with that. But I always think the reward is higher than the risk, so I'll take the risk on that. So yeah, but I think for me is, again, I think it comes from a sales culture. Sales culture is very social, and I'm used to that, and that's what I was brought up with, in my experience. Yeah, I tend to sort of see that works really, really well. But also, for me personally, it helps with, again, we can argue the terminology, but it helps with radical candor, to be honest. For me, and it doesn't work for everybody. For everybody, when they really know the person, they find having a difficult conversation really hard. But for me, the more I know them, makes life so much easier, because I'm just having a conversation and the trust is built so much that they know. And I agree with Adam Grant's, he does an amazing, I think it's a TED talk or some interview where I've been practicing this ever since I heard this, but he said somewhere that he starts off a difficult conversation with something along the lines of, I'm about to have a difficult conversation because I know, or I have the confidence in your abilities to do X. And that's how I always lead and start my difficult conversation with people, because they know from the love and attention I give them that it's coming from a really good place, that I truly believe they will be really successful, and I want them to win. But I do not mince my words. So I'm pretty direct on that front, to be honest, compared to a lot of other managers. But it comes easier to me personally. I don't get anxiety of it because I feel that they know me so much. Not about, my personal life or my background or whatever, but, know what I talk about the weekend. We talk about sometimes, philosophies and life and all these wider things, inside of work and sometimes outside of work. But we have very strong social cohesion. And that for me is a good trust building aspect, and it means that I can have those conversations, and they're often very well received.
As a founder, one of the things that I've bumped into either with other founders or I myself is, in order to actually affect change and build a company and build a startup, there needs to be this constant tread of urgency. And this is urgency of, we're running out of runway if you're fundraising, or even if you're bootstrapped, we're running out of money unless we close another client, or we kind of keep going. And so a theme that I've seen, and I've felt it myself, is this kind of social aspect of connecting and chit chat and things that, as it relates to the business, could be deemed as non-trivial, right? Or not useful or not important. It's kind of this, okay, we don't have time for that. We got to get down to business. We got to talk about such and such and such. How do you, maybe with coaching, how do you help founders find the time to connect with employees, with teams, with direct reports on that more personal level, and not be so anxious about, okay, well, is this a productive use of time?
Yeah. Where do I start with this? So I'll go top down. It depends on the founder, to be very honest, because some founders find this more natural and they want to do that. So you have to do less coaching. Every founder is different, and some founders are on the other end of the spectrum, and also cultural differences and the country they're in, I think, also plays into plays very much into the leadership style as well. And I've learned that from being international. That was an amazing experience doing that. So you've got all those dynamics to work out what type of founder you're dealing with, and what are the sort of gaps there, or things that can enhance their performance and so forth, that they come to you with. But let's go top down first. Let's talk about their leadership team. So look, this is a bit controversial, what I'm about to say, but if you are a leader reporting into a founder, I'm going to be very honest, you have to kind of be used to not having recognition and a pat on the back every 2 minutes. And if you are that type of person, you're not right for a founder, because, founders who change the world are two types on what's called an Enneagram more often, that I find, which is basically like different types of personality types. One is a challenger personality, which is me. I'm not happy with anything. And we should always be doing more, and look at that hole there and so forth. And I'll find the one thing that's a problem in the data and all that. So it's those types of people. Or there's the second, which is the enthusiast, which I think is more like your Richard Branson type. So very much the visionary, so forth, right? And both of those personalities, because they're kind of either looking out all the time, or the challenger by innately is not happy with everything. You've got to be used to, they're the type of often personality types you're working with. So, their default position isn't going to, they have to consciously go into recognition, consciously go into all that sort of stuff. And there's always more that can be done. That's as simple as that. So when you're in a leadership role, you just have to have that kind of maturity and that self-assurance and awareness to be confident in your own self, to be really at that sort of table, I think, with a founder, because you don't really get managed in a leadership role when you're reporting to a founder. They're not great managers, and perhaps shouldn't they be? Fair enough. We can go into that another time, although there's a leveling up to an extent you need to help them with. If you are someone that needs a lot of credit as a leadership skill in a startup, then that's a problem, because you just have to have the satisfaction of knowing that your work is achieving greatness as the mission. That kind of has to be enough when you're a leader, that the mission is kind of greater than the CEO and greater than all of us. And that's a really strange thing to kind of be, get used to if you're a leader in those types of roles. I think I strangely have worked with these types of leaders all my life, where maybe once a year, in sales in particular, like you'd be a top biller and you'd work your guts out, and you just get at Christmas just that one pat on the back, well done, and that's all you need. You just know you had a great year, and you're like close to being irreplaceable at that point, and you don't need more than that. But you have to get to that place of maturity in yourself and EQ to be comfortable with that. But then, there are times then more broadly of like what is even a recognition strategy, because it is motivating, right? In the systems design that you talk to about a founder of this concept, and you say, look, there are some wider things we really need to think about. We're all pushing very hard here. This is the milestone or the North Star we want to hit for the A or whatever. What are we going to plan and do? And yes, they can delegate that down, but they have to recognize that we need to celebrate milestones. That's very, very important in a startup as the company-wide recognition. So, we can delegate that across leaders, whoever we want, but that has to be part of, it doesn't even have to be a big budget, but we need to do something to recognize that and, come back as a team, even if it's like one team. And then, some of those micro behaviors, of course, you want to see in the founder, because it does scale to an extent. If they, founder behavior is a huge part that people look up to and will start doing. And that's, it's all around the founder for the first, few years and the early rounds. What you want to do then with the founder, again, is always make sure that they understand key milestones in the leadership journey. And that usually, as I said, that 1 year pat on the back or that one thing, if they execute on their 90-day plan, you should give them some more formal feedback and so forth, and talk about, how that's motivating. And what I tend to find, even as a leader myself, which I say to them is, often the early careers hires need lots of that. Why is that important? Because it builds confidence. So for early careers, what you're trying to do is build confidence. I want people to feel confident in the work, that they'll take a bit more risk, then they'll take these things and so forth. So I want to give that sort of recognition and feedback. But when you're more senior, the milestones are longer. This execution roadmap is longer, which they're going to like have that pat on the back on. So it might even be, like I said, the end of the year, well done, that's it. So it's horses for courses, but you talk about all these things at length with the founder, so they can kind of work out what their best recognition style is, what they're more comfortable with. I think the key thing is with as coaching is to work out, like, you have your way that works, but the founder is any leader, they've got their own style. So you have to work out, like, what's the thing that's comfortable, that probably will have impact on the people around them, but still in their comfort zone, that's not too far out of it, and they slowly can build on that over time. Yeah,
it's phenomenal. I feel like I learned so much about myself in just this moment of you kind of explaining a few different things. I'm like, yep, check that box, not that box, but this box. So yeah,
what's your thoughts on that? I'd love to know. What tell me, what do you think?
I mean, I think it's confirmation of a few different things, such as founders generally struggle with management. Again, I do think that there are many founders that level up into that CEO or that executive as the company scales, but it does take a shift and change and growth.
Yeah.
And it also takes an appetite to want to do that.
Yes. Yeah.
And then I've never actually heard about the kind of 2 enneagrams specifically for founders. I've heard about that framework, but I've never really gone too deep into it. But the challenger framework, or the challenger persona, and then also the enthusiast or the enthusiastic person persona, those are, as I look back across all the different companies that I've started and all my co-founders and myself, it's those two buckets. It is without a doubt those two buckets. So I think that's very, very spot on, and it's just interesting to hear how that then emanates down to the leaders and what that relationship is, and then on downwards into the company in general, and how the founders set the tone for what the rest of the team looks to. So yeah, it's phenomenal.
It's well, I was very lucky to learn this from actually, so I can't take all the credit for this. I actually learned this from a coach that I had in my VP career, which I'm very thankful for. She's fantastic. She was a COO to a unicorn company years ago. And that CEO even talked about her on Diary of a CEO. So thank you to her. Her name is Davinia Knowles. Yeah, so thank you to her. Yeah.
Beth, I feel like we could go on forever. But
yes, we could. It's late.
I'm running off to a plane.
And it's my bedtime. I need to go to sleep.
Well, thanks so much for coming on. And if people want to connect with you or learn more about Developa, where should they go? How should they connect with you?
Yes, I'm predominantly on LinkedIn as my primary channel. I live in LinkedIn, so you can find me, Beth Nevins, on LinkedIn, or my company page. We are Developa. Developa is spelt with an A on the end, and and there's also my website, of course, developa.io.
Beth, thank you so much. This was phenomenally insightful for me. I appreciate it, and hope you have a wonderful evening.
Thank you so much for having me, and I hope we do this again sometime. We'll keep talking for sure.
Absolutely.
Right. Cool.
Take care.
Bye.